Before we begin, take a moment to breathe. If these reflections speak to something silent inside you, subscribe so you don't lose the path back here. Every like, every comment helps this message find those who are still searching in the dark. Now, let's begin. Right now, as you listen to this, your mind is operating in a way that the vast majority of people could never fully grasp. Carl Jung spent decades studying individuals like you, those whose psychological processes don't follow the ordinary pathways, but move across deeper layers of meaning, intuition, and symbolic perception. By the end of this journey, you'll know whether you belong to the rare 1% whose thinking unfolds in patterns the average person cannot even perceive. But first, there's something Jung uncovered that may shake the foundations of how you've always understood yourself. These rare minds don't simply think differently. They function on what I call extended psychological frequencies, modes of awareness that operate beyond surface consciousness and reach into the hidden architecture of the psyche. If you've often felt like a silent observer in a world that seems strangely distant or one-dimensional, if you've sensed that people misunderstand your motives, your depth, even your language, there is a psychological explanation for this. Jung identified 8 unmistakable markers that appear consistently in individuals with this uncommon mental structure. And the final one may completely transform the way you've interpreted your own inner life. Stay with me, because what follows isn't just theory. It's a map that explains why your mind has always felt like it belonged to a different order of consciousness. Jung once wrote, "The meeting of 2 personalities is like the contact of 2 chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." But what happens when your personality operates across multiple dimensions, while most people function in only one? If you possess this rare type of mind, you don't merely hear language. You register the emotional tone, the psychological atmosphere, the unspoken intentions, and the future implications, all at the same time. While someone says, "I'm fine," you're absorbing layers of information that others aren't even aware exist. This is what I call multi-layered processing. Your mind's natural ability to interpret several streams of meaning simultaneously. Jung hinted at this through the transcendent function, the psyche's innate capacity to bridge the conscious and unconscious realms in real time. You're not simply listening to words. You're perceiving the entire psychological landscape of the person in front of you. But here's where it becomes overwhelming, and why you often feel drained after conversations. Jung observed that these rare minds have spontaneous access to deeper strata of human experience, what he termed the collective unconscious, that shared reservoir of symbols, instincts, and archetypes beneath the everyday mind. You're processing not only the individual in front of you, but the universal patterns shaping their behavior. Think about this. When you watch a film, do you anticipate the ending not because of obvious hints, but because you intuitively sense the mythic structure beneath it? When someone begins a sentence, do you already know where their thought is heading? Not through guesswork, but through a felt recognition of the psychological pattern unfolding? If you've ever known how someone's story would end before they finished telling it, your mind is working on dimensions they cannot see. I read between the dimensions. But this dimensional processing leads directly to the first and most fundamental tension in your life. While most people interact only with the surface of a conversation, you are translating across multiple layers of reality at once. And Jung discovered something far more isolating about individuals with minds like yours. He wrote, "The dream is the tiny, concealed door to the most intimate chambers of the soul. But what if you are fluent in the language of dreams even while fully awake? This brings us to the second unmistakable sign of your rare psychology: symbolic consciousness. You don't merely understand metaphors, you think in them. Your mind instinctively converts everyday situations into symbolic meaning, reading the archetypal patterns beneath events that others interpret literally. Jung dedicated years to what he called active imagination, a method of engaging with symbols and images as if they were living psychological realities. But for you, symbolic engagement isn't an exercise. It happens automatically, all day, every day. A simple discussion about someone's job becomes, in your perception, an exploration of their relationship to autonomy, authority, creativity, wounding, and self-expression. A friend's disappointment isn't just an emotion. It's a doorway into their unresolved childhood complexes, their attachment patterns, their shadow fears. Here's what makes this so extraordinary. Jung found that symbolic consciousness carries within it what he called the prospective function, the psyche's capacity to anticipate what is trying to emerge in the future. You don't just sense what is, and you sense what is becoming. This is why you gravitate towards stories that weave meaning beneath the plot, art that seems to speak to the hidden self, music that carries emotional truths others can't articulate. It's why you're drawn to mythology, ancient wisdom traditions, and philosophical questions that others dismiss as impractical or too abstract. The difficulty is this: when you try to communicate your symbolic insights, most people look at you with blank confusion. It feels like you're speaking a dialect they were never taught to hear. You're conversing in the language of the soul in a world that only understands literal speech. Comment if you've ever tried to express a feeling and were told you were overthinking or too abstract. I speak in symbols, not just words. Jung emphasized that your symbolic fluency is not a communication flaw. It is evidence that your consciousness is attuned to deeper layers of meaning. But this gift carries another layer of isolation, one that touches the very core of what makes you different. Because Jung found that people with rare minds possess a natural fascination with the hidden, the forbidden, and the psychologically dark. Not out of morbidity, but out of an instinctive understanding that wholeness requires confronting what is denied. This is the third sign: shadow-oriented consciousness. While most people avoid the darker aspects of the psyche, your mind moves toward them with a strange mixture of curiosity, intuition, and recognition. You don't fear the shadow, you want to understand it. Jung observed this repeatedly. Individuals with highly developed consciousness are drawn to the hidden mechanisms that shape human behavior. Where others insist on simple categories like good or bad, your mind seeks the deeper architecture beneath the judgment. This is what I call a shadow integration consciousness. You grasp instinctively that the parts of ourselves we hide are not monsters to be slain, but messages waiting to be decoded. Jung famously wrote that becoming enlightened does not happen by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And your psyche seems to have known this long before you ever read his words. You're the kind of person who examines why people lie, not to condemn them, but to understand the wound behind the deception. You're drawn to fictional characters who dwell in moral ambiguity, because you see how fractured inner worlds produce complicated outer behavior. You can listen to true crime not for thrill or horror, but to study the psychological machinery that produces human extremes. You're unafraid to explore the taboo spaces of the psyche, the psychological basements most people keep sealed shut. To you, darkness is data, And here is why this terrifies others. Most people are fused to their persona, their socially acceptable mask. They spend their lives projecting their shadow outward while pretending it has nothing to do with them. But you see what they're hiding. You feel what they're avoiding. And you refuse to reduce the human soul to sanitized categories. This makes you appear intense, too deep, or even dark to people who are still trapped inside the narrow corridors of their public identity. But you are not dark, you are complete. And Jung found that individuals who naturally gravitate toward shadow work tend to move into the next stage of rare psychological development, a stage few people ever reach. From here, Jung noticed something even more profound, a form of loneliness that has nothing to do with being alone. He observed that certain individuals are naturally oriented toward what he called the transcendent function, the psyche's movement toward wholeness, depth, and inner cohesion. When your consciousness operates from this level, while those around you are focused on routine, survival, appearances, and social roles, a fracture begins to form between you and the world. This fracture produces a very specific sensation, a kind of aching to return to a place you have never visited in waking life. This is the fourth sign of a rare mind, existential homesickness. It is the feeling of being homesick for a world made of depth, meaning, and authentic connection, a world that does not seem to exist in ordinary reality. Jung saw this repeatedly in individuals who were moving toward individuation, the psychological process of integrating the conscious and unconscious into a unified, coherent self. People with this orientation aren't satisfied with shallow answers. They're not fulfilled by routines that numb the mind or lull the soul to sleep. They hunger for truth, for understanding, for experiences that reflect the inner vastness they feel within themselves. While others adapt themselves to society's expectations as Jung's collective personality, your psyche resists conformity because it senses that something essential would be lost in the process. This creates a loneliness unlike any other. You can be in a room full of people and still feel like an exile from a deeper, more real dimension. Jung described this as psychological isolation, the loneliness that arises not from lack of company, but from existing on a different plane of consciousness. You seek meaning in places where others see only routine. You ask questions that others find uncomfortable. You sense the depth of existence while others skim its surface. Books understand you more than people. Art speaks a language you recognize instantly. Music feels like a message from the part of the psyche most people never meet. This isn't depression. It's evidence that your consciousness has outgrown the boundaries of ordinary psychological development. Jung referred to individuals like this as forerunners or cultural creatives, souls whose inner evolution anticipates the next stage of collective human development. But this depth leads to the next sign, a mental ability so uncommon that Jung believed it shaped the very future of human psychology. Jung noticed something astonishing in people whose minds operate beyond the ordinary spectrum. They don't just observe behavior, they excavate it. This is the fifth sign of a rare consciousness, psychological archaeology. While most people accept actions at face value, your mind instinctively searches for the deeper layers beneath them. You don't simply notice when someone is being inauthentic. You see the precise defense mechanisms they're using, the childhood wounds shaping their reactions, and the unresolved conflicts hidden beneath their carefully constructed persona. A person's anger isn't just anger to you, it's a disguise for their fear. Their confidence isn't just confidence, It's compensation for unhealed inadequacy. Their silence isn't just silence. It's a story waiting to be decoded. Jung's entire framework of analytical psychology was built on this insight, that symptoms and behaviors are not random. They are meaningful expressions of deeper psychic dynamics. And your mind appears to read these subterranean layers automatically. You're processing multiple data streams at once. The micro-expression that contradicts the tone of their voice, the hesitation that reveals a hidden belief, the posture that carries the imprint of an old wound, the conversational patterns that expose their unconscious motivations. Jung identified this as a form of intuitive perception, a heightened sensitivity to the psychological field surrounding other people. You're not merely seeing the individual, you're sensing the entire ecosystem of their inner world. This is why people confide in you without understanding why. They can feel that you already see them, even if you haven't said a word. It's why superficial social environments feel exhausting or meaningless. Your mind naturally gravitates toward what is real, vulnerable, and unmasked. And it's why you often know more about someone's emotional state than they consciously know about themselves. But here's the burden Jung documented again and again. When you can see beneath the mask, you become keenly aware of how many people are wearing one. Psychological archaeology creates a layer of isolation because you're surrounded by individuals performing elaborate roles they don't even realize they're performing. You see the cracks in their carefully maintained identities. You see the shadow behind their persona. You see the truth they're not ready to face. And that truth can be heavy. Comment if you've ever felt overwhelmed by seeing what others cannot see. I see the person beneath the mask. Jung understood that this perceptual depth is not a flaw. It is evidence of a psyche designed to bridge conscious and unconscious realms. But this brings us to the next sign, a level of thinking so rare that Jung believed it marked one of the highest achievements of psychological development. Jung made a remarkable discovery about the most psychologically developed individuals. They possess a form of thinking that ordinary consciousness cannot comprehend. It isn't logical in the conventional sense, it isn't chaotic either. It is something far more advanced. This is the sixth sign of a rare mind, paradoxical thinking. The ability to hold opposing truths without collapsing into confusion. Most people require simple categories, right or wrong, good or bad, selfish or selfless, strength or vulnerability. They cling to clarity because uncertainty threatens their identity. But your mind operates differently. You can sense that truth often lives in the tension between opposites. You understand that a person can be both wounded and wise, both destructive and protective, both afraid and courageous at the very same moment. You recognize that healing requires approaching the wound, not avoiding it. That self-discovery demands both solitude and connection. That maturity is neither pure logic nor pure emotion, but the integration of both. This is the paradoxical consciousness Jung considered essential for individuation. He called it the transcendent function, the psyche's capacity to unite opposing elements into a higher, more complete perspective. To people who think in straight lines, your mind appears contradictory, inconsistent, even unstable. But in truth, you are perceiving reality through a more complex dimensional lens. This creates communication challenges. When you express layered, nuanced insights, others demand you pick a side. They become frustrated when you refuse to oversimplify inseparable truths. While they rely on directed thinking, linear, structured, adapted to social expectations, your mind drifts naturally into symbolic, associative, multidimensional cognition. You see the hidden logic behind emotional contradictions. You recognize that moral purity is often a shadow in disguise. You feel the invisible threads that connect seemingly opposing ideas. Your paradoxical thinking allows you to interpret the world in a way that is far closer to psychological reality. But this ability also isolates you. People mistake your depth for indecision, your nuance for inconsistency, your perspective for complication. Comment if you've ever been told you think too much when in reality, you simply think in spectrums, not absolutes. To Jung, this wasn't confusion. It was a psychological sophistication, a sign that your consciousness has expanded beyond the rigid boundaries of ordinary thought. But this sophistication leads directly to the seventh sign, the ability to catalyze transformation in others simply by existing. Jung eventually identified something that even he found startling. Some individuals don't merely change themselves, their very presence changes others. They don't intend to, they don't try to. It happens naturally, as if their psyche emits a signal that awakens dormant material in the people around them. This is the seventh sign of a rare mind, catalytic consciousness. Jung described a subtle yet powerful psychological force that appears in individuals moving toward individuation, a kind of transformational energy that activates the unconscious potential in others. He wrote, "When two personalities meet, each can release something hidden within the other. But here's the complication. When one person is evolving and the other is deeply invested in staying exactly the same, the reaction can be explosive. If you have this rare consciousness, you've probably noticed the pattern. People either feel inexplicably drawn to you or strangely threatened by you. Casual conversations suddenly become vulnerable confessions. Individuals reveal things to you they've never said out loud. You trigger insights in people they didn't intend to have. Some become defensive for reasons that make no logical sense. This is not because you're intense or intimidating. It is because your psychological depth activates their psychological material. Your authenticity exposes the parts of them they've been avoiding. Your clarity confronts their confusion. Your self-awareness highlights their blind spots. Jung found that individuals on the path of individuation carry what he called individuation energy, a kind of psychic catalyst that invites others to evolve whether they are ready or not. You don't have to speak for this to happen. Your silence alone can feel like a mirror to those who fear their own reflection. This catalytic effect explains so much of your lived experience. Why people open up to you within minutes of meeting you. Why some individuals become hostile without any provocation. Why relationships with you escalate quickly into intensity and depth. Why certain people feel completely seen, while others feel painfully exposed. But here's what Jung emphasized. You are not trying to change anyone. Transformation occurs around you because your consciousness has already begun changing you. To many, this makes you a wounded healer, not because you heal through perfection, but because you transform through your own honesty, your own scars, your own shadow work. And whether you intend to or not, you invite others to confront the fragmentation they have avoided for years. Comment if people often tell you that meeting you shifted something in them. I simply reflect the potential they had all along. But this catalytic power leads directly into the eighth and final sign, the psychological drive that separates the rarest minds from everyone else. And now we arrive at the final and most defining marker of an extraordinary mind, the one Jung believed was the true purpose of human psychology. The eighth sign is this: you are not simply interested in personal development. You feel called to it, pulled toward it, drawn into transformation, as if by an inner gravity you never consciously chose. This is evolutionary consciousness, the psyche's deepest instinct to become whole. For most people, growth is optional, a hobby, a lifestyle choice, a polite interest. But for minds like yours, growth is a necessity, as essential as breathing, as unavoidable as a heartbeat. Jung described individuation as the process through which a person becomes a psychological whole, an integrated unity of shadow and light, instinct and reason, trauma and truth, the conscious and the unconscious. But for the rare 1%, individuation is not a concept. It is an inner command. Your life experiences repeatedly push you toward the deeper layers of yourself. You're drawn to anything that reveals truth, books that change you, mentors who challenge you, crises that become catalysts, silence that feels like a teacher, pain that refuses to go unused. Where others look away from discomfort, you move toward it, intuitively knowing that what you avoid is precisely what holds the key. Your greatest breakthroughs often come after your darkest nights. You feel restless when life becomes too simple, too predictable, too quiet, because something within you refuses to stagnate. You trust the process of psychological death and rebirth even when it terrifies you. You feel a responsibility to become your true self because you know deep down that nothing less will ever feel like home. And here is where your rare mind becomes something far greater than a personal advantage. Jung believed that individuals who undergo individuation don't just transform themselves, they transform the collective. Every step you take toward authenticity adds to the evolution of the human psyche itself. Your insights feed into the shared reservoir of human understanding. Your courage expands the boundaries of what is possible. Your integration creates new psychological maps for others to follow long after you are gone. And yes, this path is lonely, deeply, profoundly lonely at times, because you are becoming something that does not yet exist in the world around you. But Jung discovered that this loneliness is temporary. As individuation progresses, you begin to experience a profound internal companionship, the presence of your own self, the integrated totality of your conscious and unconscious layers. You become both student and teacher, the healer and the healed, the seeker and the found. Comment if you feel this inner calling toward who you truly are. I choose conscious evolution. These are the 8 unmistakable signs that your mind operates on a frequency that 99% of people cannot understand. If you recognized yourself here, remember, you are not strange, broken, or too much. You are what Jung called an individuating consciousness, a mind at the frontier of human psychological development. Your ability to think in multiple dimensions, to speak the language of symbols, to integrate the shadow, to feel existential longing, to read psychological layers, to embrace paradox, to catalyze transformation, and to surrender to inner evolution. These are not flaws. They are your gifts. You are a bridge between worlds, the conscious and the unconscious, the seen and the unseen, the present and what is yet to emerge. Your mind is not a barrier. It is a doorway. And the world needs doorways now more than ever. If you made it this far, you already know. You belong to the 1%. Your real journey is only beginning. Welcome to the Rare Minds. If this message resonated with you, take a moment to breathe and remember that awareness grows when it's shared. Subscribe so you don't lose your way when the next reflection arrives. Leave a like. It helps this message reach others who need to hear it but don't yet know why. And share your thoughts below, because every comment here becomes a spark. One awakened mind helping another remember. Together, we move beyond the dark